Welcome to part one of the Fundraising Fundamentals course of the Nonprofit Bootcamp e-learning series. Our trainer today is Diana Abellera, who's the owner and principal of Abellera Consulting. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, Diana has been fighting for social justice and environmental justice throughout her career. She created education programs for organizations such as the Environmental Justice and Climate Change Initiative and Urban Habitat that engage low-income communities and communities of color in campaigns for healthier and more equitable environments. Diana served as the development manager and education director at People's Grocery, where she focused on engaging the West Oakland community and developing a local food system. As the regional food systems director for Community Alliance with Family Farmers, Abellera oversaw farm-to-market programs and staff in 5 regions throughout California. As Chief Operating Officer at CAF, she built a strong development program and created systems across finance, development, and programs. Diana served as a co-chair on the board of directors at FACES, the Filipino-American Coalition for Environmental Solidarity, for 4 years, and she currently serves on the Finance Committee. Diana graduated with the first cohort of Next Generation Leaders of Color program, a year-long professional development program offered that provided workshops, technical assistance, coaching, and peer support groups for nonprofit managers. After a 14-year career working in nonprofits, she recently founded Abellera Consulting in 2016 to build the capacity of organizations working to advance social and environmental justice. Now, Diana loves working with small and mid-sized organizations to develop their fundraising programs, write grants, and direct resources to impactful programs in communities throughout the country. Diana, we are really lucky to have you on board for this course. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. You can take it away.
Great. Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to start by giving you an overview of what we're going to cover throughout the next 3 weeks. Fundraising fundamentals can include quite a variety of topics that we obviously don't have time to cover, so I spent some time thinking about the types of funding and skills that are most relevant for community-based food systems nonprofits that I've worked with. This webinar series will cover how to think through strategic investment and fundraising efforts across multiple revenue sources, as well as some best practices in making your development department run more effectively and efficiently, particularly in grants and individual donor development. So today we're going to talk broadly about overall strategy in developing your development program, looking at the 5 different big revenue streams and how you might think about putting them all together in a realistic fundraising plan for your organization. In the following sessions, we'll dig into more detail on specific strategies. Next week, I'll be joined by Aimee Retzler from Sierra Harvest to hear how her organization decreased reliance on restricted grants and now operates with over 80% unrestricted funding, due in large part to investing in and instituting a strong individual donor program. In the last session, we'll focus on grants, both from foundations and government. We'll talk not only about navigating grant language and what funders are looking for, but also building strong systems between program, finance, and development so that your game plan for soliciting and securing grants throughout the year is solid. So for today, we're going to talk about what a fundraising plan is and how it can help you think through your development strategy. And I've seen a lot of different fundraising plan templates and realize that people just have different styles and structures that appeal to how they work. So I'm not going to walk through any one template, but I'll talk about what goes into a fundraising plan and show you a few examples to choose from. But we'll mostly work through aligning your fundraising efforts with your organizational needs and capacity in order to increase diversity of revenues and your ability to adjust in the face of change. So what exactly is a fundraising plan and why do you need it? A fundraising plan is ultimately a tool that documents fundraising strategies and targets across various revenue streams to first and foremost help you meet your budget. It's an internal communications tool for you, your staff, and board to understand how the work is funded and what each person's individual role is. It creates accountability and helps you build towards long-term goals. We know that there's a lot of talk about the Farm Bill being reduced and changes to the new tax code that may cause individual donor giving to decrease. So a fundraising plan can help us ensure diversity, increase flexibility, and build resiliency in our fundraising efforts in the face of unforeseen or more likely foreseen circumstances. The plan should include a written part that documents the overall strategies, which is the long-term goal, and a calendar to coordinate the activities that lead to the plan's goals and targets in each funding area throughout the year, and those are more short-term. Again, we'll look at templates at the end. So let's take a step back and look at the overall giving in the United States. According to this 2016 report from Giving USA, nonprofits around the US raised $390 billion from contributed giving overall. So to be clear, the pie chart on the left shows that 20% of nonprofit income came from these contributed sources, including individual donors, foundations, bequests, and corporate giving. As you can see, individuals gave much more than foundations. If you do the math, 72% of this 20% is 14.4% overall. And foundations gave just 15% of this 20%, which amounts to about 3% of overall nonprofit income, or about $59 billion. I was surprised to see that it was such a small number, especially with how much I know food systems organizations rely on foundations for funding. You'll see on the right that 30% came from government contracts, 30% from earned revenues, and the rest came from unrelated business income, which is not relevant to your organization's mission and is taxable. So I just wanted to give you this because while your organization may not have may have a very different breakdown of your income, it's good to get an understanding of how much income in general is coming from each of these funding sources across the board as you're looking to tap into them. Okay, so this chart has a lot of dense information. It'll help you in thinking about what to consider if you're just getting started, or the pros and cons of each funding area if you're thinking of developing a new funding stream for your organizations. We could really spend the entire 30 minutes walking through each type of revenue, but since we're going to spend more time on government grants, foundation grants, and individual donors in the following webinars, I won't get into them now. But let's look briefly at some of the other revenue streams. If you go down to the corporate funding is often developed through one-on-one relationships by finding the right people, usually on the marketing team or an executive level decision maker. Typically, corporations like event sponsorships that get their name out to your audiences, but they also like to give in-kind products and sometimes even larger amounts of cash. You'll want to look for businesses that are aligned with your work. Restaurants and grocery stores that promote local food, microbreweries that are increasing their giving in support of local ag and food initiatives. Oftentimes, rural banks support agricultural communities. There's a lot of opportunities to develop mutually beneficial relationships and cross-promote your work across the food system. Often the really lucrative ones don't have published information, so it's good to find ways to develop relationships with those businesses that are in your community or those that serve your particular audience. Skipping down to events, I actually typically wouldn't make them their own category, as they're really a mechanism for bringing in other revenue sources like individual donors, business sponsors, and earned revenues. They can have mixed results. Often they yield some money, but many just break even or even lose money by the time you factor in all the costs, especially staff time. Now, I have seen some events that make significant money when they have lots of business sponsorships and vendor showcases, those sort of revenue streams within them. I find that they're best in achieving multiple goals besides raising money, like fundraising or advancing programmatic goals like promoting local food. And finally, at the bottom, we have earned income, which is a great revenue source when the strategy is rooted in mission. You want to be careful not to overdevelop a revenue source that takes away resources from the mission. In food systems work, I've seen nonprofits develop CSA programs, sell nutrition education kits to schools, rent property, develop a consulting arm, charge speaker fees, and much, much more. I love these sort of programs because I find that they're really great ways to sustain ongoing programs that contribute some extra funds to operating costs. But again, you have to be very careful that they're set up on the front end to break even or make profit. Now, we won't have time to dig into detail on the strategies that I just talked about here during these webinars, but if you have specific questions, I'd be happy to talk through those with you during the one-on-one consultation sessions. Okay, so with all those different potential funding sources in mind, how do you get it all organized and come up with a strategy across all of those sources? Well, this is where a fundraising plan comes in. I've adapted a model I learned from Compass Point, a nonprofit leadership and strategy organization here in the Bay Area. You'll see that it looks pretty similar to Tamara Jones' Steps to a Strategic Plan from the last webinar series, going from prep work to analyzing internal and external factors to documenting and evaluating. In fact, you'll see a lot of overlap between strategic planning and fundraising throughout this whole process. So I'm going to go through each one of these steps one by one. First, you'll want to assemble a team. You may have one person do most of the writing, but you need the thinking and the buy-in from the broader team for the overall fundraising effort to be successful. Here's just some examples of who you might want to recruit to your team, mainly the people who will be in charge of implementing the plan and have a significant role in fundraising. But be careful not to have too many cooks in the kitchen. We'll get to exactly what you'll want their help with in a minute when we get to the research, analysis, and decision-making stages. Now, I also wanted to be sure to include the step, ensuring foundational elements are in place or in development. So the folks at the Wallace Center were so smart to have the strategic planning course before this one, because the tool that we went over then offers a lot of the information you need to develop a strong fundraising program. The case statement, mission, vision, all this stuff. As a consultant, I often step into organizations that want me to help them bring in the money. But when I dig into what they're raising money for, I sometimes find that they don't have clear agreement on program goals, timelines, plans, staffing. So while you need the money to keep coming in to keep the programs afloat, you also need to be able to tell the story of what will happen with those funds in the future. These foundational elements help us know, what are we fundraising for? What programs are we growing? What are we going to phase out, even if it's eventually down the road? Will you need to hire new staff? These are the things you need to know, or at least need to be on your way to answering as you start your fundraising plan. Also, what's your budget? It makes sense to develop your fundraising plan before your fiscal year starts, a few months before, with your budgeting process. So you want to start with your dream budget that includes everything that you could want to do in this upcoming year. Then as you build your fundraising plan, you can see if you can realistically achieve everything with what you can bring in, or if you have to make some adjustments depending on your projections. Okay, so now your team can start by mapping out the existing fundraising activities you're already doing. This is a good way of making sure you're thinking about all the different pots of funding, big and little, that are coming your way. Start by putting your organization in the center, and you can see in this example, I worked with my former employer, Community Alliance with Family Farmers, or CAF. I'll be using them quite a bit throughout the presentation. Then you add the 5 revenue sources that we discussed in circles, coming off in spokes around that. From there, branch off with the types of funds you solicit or get from each of those sources, which are written here in brown. Then work with your team to brainstorm new funding opportunities opportunities. What are some funds that you currently don't get but would like to? Which ones would you like to grow? Add those in a different color, which are here in green, or highlight the ones that you want to increase. You end up with a visual of your fundraising efforts and ideas, which are often more complex than most people realize. I would even suggest adding individual staff or positions that support each of these activities so that you can get a sense of the FTE that goes into fundraising, which will likely extend beyond your development staff. So now you have all your ideas out there. Here's the hard part. How do you figure out how to best use your resources to support your organization's needs? You have to first start with your organization's history. Where have you had success? It's great to have your finance folks pull up income statements from at least the last 3 years to show trends in each revenue stream. You may need to look closely at the detail to make sure everything is accounted for and coded correctly. I did this with one organization and found that they were making about $5,000 a year without much effort from giving programs of local grocery stores. So they decided that they would spend minimal effort in trying to develop other relationships with grocery stores to grow that revenue stream. This is also where you'll want to look at success rates for donor campaigns or your grant success rate. How many have you applied to and how much have you received? Run the numbers on your events. How much did they net? It's really important to get a good understanding of what's worked well for you and build off of that. And identify which areas have strong potential for growth and which ones aren't yielding as strong results as you would like. Next, you'll need to assess the external funding landscape. What do you know is changing? Is a longtime foundation partner sunsetting a program? Are new funds available for your program? In California, we have new farm-to-school funds that just started this year, available for school districts. So nonprofits can help their partners apply to those as subcontractors. Should be thinking about that in your strategy. The tax bill is something that's come up often. It's hard to say how it will impact individual donor giving. I've read and heard from fundraising professionals that it will de-incentivize giving, but I've also heard from my accountants that it will not. So it's hard to tell. But you are or should be having these conversations with your team as well as your donors so you can get a sense of how the landscape now might affect your specific donor base in the near future. Also, talk to others in the same field to get a sense of how they're thinking about these external factors in their programs. You'll also want to look at your foundational documents, the elements of your strategic plan, to think about the trajectory of what you're fundraising for. Will you need increased money for a new project? Are you trying to hire a communications director? You may just know that your biggest foundation funder is not going to renew, so you'll need to figure out how to make up that source of revenue. So how do you decide what to do? This is where it becomes crucial to think about your strengths and capacity and balance it with turnaround time and level of funding needed. Look back at your fundraising map. Where's your expertise? Who has capacity? How much will your new efforts net? How much do you think they will net, and by when? This could be a good guided discussion with your fundraising planning team, but you need the data from the previous step to talk through your options. Bring all the data to the table to ground yourselves in what has been tried, what has worked, and what hasn't worked. Now, as you're getting excited about all the different opportunities and potential funding sources, it's a good time to remind you that although diversity is important in building resiliency into your fundraising plan, you want to be careful not to stretch yourselves too thin. I really appreciate this quote from Kim Klein, a successful individual donor fundraiser here in the Bay Area, who said, diversity means that you have as many people as you can coordinate, raising money from as many sources as you can manage. I think this is a really smart way to think about how much you can take on. And I'd suggest getting really good at 1 to 2 revenue streams and developing other secondary ones to supplement those. So all these questions that you're thinking through at this point are big questions with many ways to approach them and analyze what will work best for you. And there really isn't a set formula to getting the answers about what will work best for your organization. But I'll show you an example of how one organization I worked with, again, CAF, had this discussion. We knew that several of our government contracts would be ending soon, and we also wanted to launch a new climate smart farming program. So we had to make some decisions. So I love this matrix because it's a relevant metaphorical tool for us food systems organizations, the garden matrix. So at this point, CAF had already gone through all the other steps that we've gone over and had documented what we learned about our past fundraising successes, program and community needs, the external landscape, and the elements of the strategic plan. And it was all posted on flip chart paper around the room. So then we charted the projects and fundraising efforts across a garden matrix, tracking where these projects were in a garden's life cycle. We talked about each project. You can see programs are in green and fundraising efforts in blue, to determine whether they were in a position of sowing new seeds, as you can see in the bottom left quadrant, growing existing efforts in the top left, harvesting their benefits on the top right, or composting in the bottom right. So you can see that of the projects in green, we had decided to sow a new project, the Climate Smart Farming Program, and grow 2 projects, food safety and farm to cafeteria. To support them, we are going to rely on building new business sponsorships and growing new foundation support. And the organization had already talked through these external opportunities and had already cultivated some strong, promising leads. So we felt confident about saying they were going to grow. On the right side of the y-axis, we see that there were projects that were going to continue, policy and harvest of the month. Now, harvesting is for programs that are doing well without much new investment, and that we can contain them at their current levels, and they weren't in need of growth. Same goes for the funding circles. We knew that government contracts were ending and that the annual solstice event that they were running had maxed out in the level of revenues they thought they could get. Now, that's not to say they're going to stop those. They're going to continue to apply to government funds and to continue to run the event, but they didn't foresee that the funding levels would grow on those 2 sources. Now, in the bottom right quadrant, we see 2 projects that the team had found to be good projects, but were less mission aligned, less in the strategic plan, and were harder to sustain. One was a field trip program called Know Your Farmer, and the other was a small fundraiser that wasn't able to yield as much and was distracting from the organization's larger annual fundraiser, the Solstice event. So these 2 projects were going to be composted or ended, with the hopes that those energies could then be transferred to other parts of the garden. So from this discussion, the team made strategic decisions about what type of funding they would pursue. So new foundation support for the climate program and growing business partnerships that would yield more unrestricted funds. You may not need to go through all these steps, but I just wanted to offer an example of the tools and types of discussions to have when you're talking through your fundraising strategy. Now, this is important because it's not just about bringing in money. It's about aligning organizational needs and programs with realistic revenue sources and staff capacity. So now you have your strategic direction. Most of the conversations you had to this point serve to inform the fundraising plan, but the actual fundraising plan document will detail how you will get there. The plan will help you get organized and coordinate strategies, goals, and activities across all your funding areas. Now, you can use the template that Tamara Jones presented last month and fill out the tabs specific to your fundraising program. And that way it's all linked to your other foundational elements, your unique value proposition, and your mission and vision. But I'll show you some other templates here that are specific to fundraising. This one's from the Texas Commission of the Arts. and it's more of a narrative that helps you document the thinking, strategy, and resources needed for each funding area. So you'll have 1 to 2 pages for each source of funds. This one's focused on board solicitation, but then you'll have another page on individual donors and another for foundations, etc. It's helpful in documenting the logic and reasoning behind why you chose certain pathways over others. And this is really valuable if there's been a lot of turnover or if there will be a transition in the development department or of leadership. It's a good way of building institutional knowledge and ensuring that future staff don't reinvent the wheel. I also like how at the bottom of each page you can document the past 3 years of revenues in each funding area and add the projections for the upcoming year so that you can clearly see the trends in that revenue source. This template is from Compass Point. There are links here at the bottom, and we will also distribute these after the webinar. It breaks down high-level strategies in each area to more tangible objectives and activities. The link actually is not just to the template, but to the full manual that walks you through Compass Point's fundraising planning process, which is what I used as the base for the model I just walked you through. These next 2 slides are from the First Nations Development Institute. And I really like this template because it brings your organizational needs to the forefront with a budget. And it breaks down the goals by revenue source and then further into funding strategy. It also has a chart for your non-monetary goals, as you see on the right, like number of face-to-face meetings, names on your email list. And the actual strategies page here is similar to the one from Compass Point. And of course, each plan should have a big calendar to accompany it. That way you know the upcoming deadlines and major activities well ahead of time. And you can coordinate with program and communication staff. I would suggest doing the calendar for 12 to 18 months out, not too much further as deadlines often change year to year, but you can use it as a template for the following year. And here's another simple, easy format that I use in Google Drive with my clients. This one's an arts organization, so these specific deadlines may be less relevant for you. But the key is just to make sure it's something that you and your team are going to refer to on a regular basis. So once you have these tools, it's important to make sure that you circle back to the full board and staff for a few reasons as listed here. It can be an hour-long presentation and then follow up with individuals to work through integrating fundraising into their work plans, helping board members figure out their targets for individual giving, or engaging staff on grants and events, for example. You'll want to go back and edit as needed based on their input. It honestly gets them excited, and by the end of your presentation, they're usually pretty motivated to help. Finally, you want to make sure that monthly you're checking back on your progress against the plan and make sure that you're hitting your targets. External trends may shift, new information may rise, targets may not have been met, and it's okay to adjust midway. Just be careful not to shift gears too soon, as it may take a while for your efforts to pay off, especially if you're building a new fee-for-service program, cultivating new foundations, or launching an individual donor campaign. But once you write down your fundraising plan, it should stand for several years. The narrative part of your plan, the fundraising strategies and goals for each revenue stream, should last as long as your strategic plan, say 3 to 5 years, because you'll need time to implement them and see the results. The specific dollar and non-monetary targets and associated activities and calendar, those will change annually, and you can easily and quickly update them with each calendar year. Okay, so that's the broad overview of thinking through your fundraising plan. As we move forward, I wanted to let you know that we'll dig deeper into some of these revenue streams, talking not only generally about approach, but also getting into specifics for food systems organizations. The final 2 revenue sources, again, we won't get into on the webinars, but I have some experience in fee-for-service, particularly in setting price points and increasing profit margins. and in developing business partnerships that appeal to marketing programs for food businesses.